time to say, someday I'm going to get involved and fix this. It's the time to say, I'm going to fix this. With that in mind, I decided to run for state representative of District 23. That's Merriam and Shawnee area. That's currently held by a one-term Democrat. And I hope with all of your help that we can turn that and all of Johnson County red next year.
He's running for Secretary of State, and he's a great candidate. I'm up here.
The history of Kansas is intertwined with voter fraud because 156 years ago, arguably the greatest, most massive case of voter fraud in American history happened right here in eastern Kansas. You see, in 1864, in November, there was an election to elect a delegate from the territory of Kansas to the U.S. Congress, to be a non-voting delegate to Congress. The Missouri border ruffians, no offense to our Missourians here, the Missouri border ruffians came across the border, not in that episode, this is the first chapter of Kansas history, Bleeding Kansas, but they came across the border many times. And one of the reasons they came across the border was not always to burn buildings and pillage and plunder and intimidate people, but was to stuff the ballot boxes, to engage in voter fraud. And then if you jump forward to today, again we have a sort of an episode with border ruffians from Missouri coming over. Not all Missourians, but a certain organization that has deep roots in Missouri is of course ACORN. And if there's one word that can sum up why I decided to run for Secretary of State, it is the word ACORN. Because the ACORN is not some fuzzy, feel-good group of community activists who just want to help in some way. It is, of course, a criminal enterprise. ACORN had offices in KC, Topeka, and Wichita in the 2008 election cycle in Kansas. So they've been very active. For analogy of a similar crime that happens all the time but is never noticed, and the closest analogy I can think of is maybe, possibly speeding, but on a highway, but even more likely is trespassing. People constantly will, walk across somebody else's property a little bit. It happens all the time, and it's just not noticed. Well, voter fraud is really prevalent in Kansas, and a recent letter was sent by members of the Kansas legislature to the Secretary of State's office, and they asked how many cases of voter fraud have been reported in the last few election cycles. And the head of the elections division of the Secretary of State's office responded back with a letter, which I have a copy of, and it says that since 2004, there have been voter fraud incidents reported in these counties. And it lists 11 counties. And some of those counties involve multiple incidents of voter fraud. Like in Wyandotte, the number is in the neighborhood of 50 incidents of voter fraud. So there are lots and lots of cases of voter fraud. In one case at least one case, there was a person who resided in Missouri but was casting a ballot in Kansas because had resided in Kansas earlier in her life. Well, the problem with an election contest, where it's in front of a judge, you have, in order to actually get the judge to reverse an election, you have to have the judge have on the stand the actual voter who can, under sworn testimony, say, yes, I voted in this election, and yes, I did not reside in this location in the district at the time, and yes, I voted for Mr. Reardon or whoever. So I've spoken for long enough. I'd be happy to answer questions about voter fraud, about illegal immigration, an area I litigate on, anything you want to talk about. And many of you already know, but if you aren't completely bored by what I say and you want to listen to more, you can tune into the Kris Kobach show 6 to 8 on 7:10 a.m. So.